ValuJet Flight 592. We begin with a flight that descended into a literal inferno. On May 11, 1996, ValuJet Flight 592 was supposed to be a routine trip from Miami to Atlanta. The plane, a DC-9, was old, and the airline didn't exactly have a stellar safety record. But for the 105 passengers and 5 crew members, it was just another flight. But deep in the cargo hold, a deadly mistake had been made. Chemical oxygen generators, improperly stored and mislabeled, were ticking time bombs. Just minutes after takeoff, the cockpit voice recorder picked up a muffled thump. "What was that?" the captain asked. They didn't know it yet, but at least one of the canisters had gone off, starting a chemical reaction that generates intense heat. Soon, the pilots heard screams of fire from the cabin. Fed by the very oxygen it was creating, the fire was now raging in the cargo hold. Temperatures shot up, melting the plane's structural supports and burning right through the cabin floor. For the next several agonizing minutes, the pilots fought for control as the cabin filled with thick, suffocating smoke. For the passengers, it was an inescapable nightmare, trapped in a burning cabin thousands of feet in the air. The plane went into a steep, uncontrollable dive, slamming into the Florida Everglades at nearly 300 miles per hour. Eyewitnesses said the plane just vanished into the swamp. There was no chance of survival. The horror of ValuJet 592 is the terrifying helplessness of being trapped in that fire, with the crew's final, frantic moments captured on the recorder before it went silent. Nigeria Airways Flight 2120 some horrors start with a single failure. Others, like Nigeria Airways Flight 2120, happen because of a whole chain of reckless decisions. On July 11, 1991, a Douglas DC-8 was chartered to fly 247 Nigerian pilgrims home from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Before they even took off, a mechanic noticed that 2 of the plane's tires were dangerously underinflated. He was told to ignore it. The flight was behind schedule. That decision was fatal. As the plane sped down the runway, the underinflated tires overheated and failed. The friction of the wheel assembly scraping against the tarmac ignited the shredded rubber. People on the ground could actually see flames licking at the landing gear, but the fire disappeared from view as the crew retracted the wheels into the plane. That standard procedure sealed their fate. It brought the fire right into the fuselage, where it came into contact with hydraulic lines and electrical systems. Minutes into the flight, alarms started blaring about a pressurization failure, but it was quickly clear something far worse was happening. The fire had burned through the cabin floor. The crowded plane became a scene of pure pandemonium as smoke and flames filled the air. The fire was so intense it began to burn through the seat harnesses of passengers near the blaze. The crew fought bravely to get back to the airport, but the plane was an uncontrollable inferno. It broke apart in mid-air just 2 miles short of the runway, killing all 261 people on board. Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision. The sky feels vast and empty, which makes the idea of a mid-air collision all the more terrifying. On November 12, 1996, that terror became a reality over Charkhi Dadri, India. Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763, a Boeing 747, had just taken off from Delhi with 312 people. At the same time, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 197, an Ilyushin Il-76 with 37 people, was descending to land at that same airport. The air traffic controller saw them both on his screen. They were on a collision course, but at different altitudes. He told the Kazakh flight to descend to 15,000 feet and the Saudi flight to climb to 14,000 feet. That should have left a safe 1,000 feet. That should have left a safe 1,000-foot buffer between them. But the Kazakh crew, struggling with English instructions, kept descending right past their assigned altitude. The controller's radar showed their position but not their height, so he was blind to the disaster that was about to unfold. He radioed a final warning: traffic at 12 o'clock, 14 miles. The message was received, but there was no reply. For the passengers on both planes, those were the last normal moments of their lives. Seconds later, the tail of the Kazakh plane sliced through the left wing of the massive 747. The crippled Saudi jet went into a fiery, uncontrollable spiral, breaking apart as it fell. The Kazakh plane also lost control and plunged to the ground. People below just saw a massive fireball erupt in the sky. All 349 people on both aircraft were lost in what remains the deadliest mid-air collision in history. The agony here is in its sudden, violent randomness, a collision in a wide-open sky that should never have happened. These stories are difficult to get through, but they're so important for understanding how critical aviation safety is and for honoring the lives that were lost. If you believe in remembering these events and learning from them, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It helps us continue to explore these complex and important stories. Helios Airways Flight 522. Imagine flying for hours on a perfectly good airplane, cruising on autopilot under a clear blue sky. Now, imagine that everyone around you, including the pilots, is unconscious. This is the uniquely haunting story of Helios Airways Flight 522, the ghost flight. On August 14, 2005, a Boeing 737 took off from Cyprus, headed for Prague. The disaster started with a simple mistake on the ground. A maintenance check was done on the cabin pressure system, and an engineer forgot to switch it from manual back to auto. The flight crew then missed this critical error during their pre-flight checks. So, as the plane climbed, the cabin didn't pressurize. The air inside slowly thinned, and oxygen levels dropped. This set off a warning horn in the cockpit, a sound that was, unfortunately, identical to another warning. The pilots got confused and started troubleshooting the wrong problem, all while they were slowly being starved of oxygen. For the passengers, oxygen masks dropped down, but those are only designed to last for about 15 minutes, just enough time for a plane to make an emergency descent. But Flight 522 wasn't descending. It kept climbing. One by one, the passengers and the crew lost consciousness from hypoxia. The plane, now a true ghost flight, flew on autopilot for over 2 hours, circling Athens. Fighter jets were sent to investigate, and their pilots saw a chilling scene. The first officer was slumped over, the captain's seat was empty, and oxygen masks were just dangling uselessly through the cabin. In one last, astonishing act, a flight attendant named Andreas Prodromou, who had stayed conscious using a portable oxygen tank, actually made it into the cockpit and tried to control the plane. But he wasn't a pilot, and it was too late. The engines flamed out from lack of fuel, and the jet crashed into a hillside, killing all 121 people. The horror of this flight is the silent, creeping dread of a slow-motion disaster. Japan Airlines Flight 123. The final moments of some flights are a terrifying, violent ordeal. For the victims of Japan Airlines Flight 123, the agony was cruelly stretched out, both in the air and on the ground. On August 12, 1985, a Boeing 747 carrying 524 people took off from Tokyo for a short flight to Osaka. Just 12 minutes in, a catastrophic explosion blew the back of the plane apart. A bad repair job from 7 years earlier had failed, and the rear pressure bulkhead ruptured. The explosion blew off the plane's tail and severed all 4 hydraulic lines, making the 747 almost completely uncontrollable. For the next 32 minutes, the pilots fought a heroic but hopeless battle, trying to fly a plane that was pitching and yawing wildly. Inside the cabin, it was chaos. Passengers knew their fate was likely sealed and began scribbling frantic final farewell notes to their families. The plane eventually crashed into the remote mountains of Mount Takamagahara. But for many, the impact wasn't the end. The crash was devastating, but a number of people survived it, trapped in the wreckage. This is where the true agony begins. For reasons that are still debated, the rescue was inexplicably delayed and wouldn't arrive for 14 hours. One of the survivors, Yumi Okiai, later remembered the sounds of that horrific night. "I heard harsh panting from many people," she said. A boy was crying mother. I clearly heard a young woman saying, "Come quickly." Trapped and in pain, the survivors could only listen as the sounds of life around them slowly faded through the cold night. When rescuers finally showed up the next morning, only 4 were still alive. The final moments for the victims of JAL 123 weren't just the 32 minutes of terror in the air, but the long, agonizing hours of waiting for a rescue that came too late.